A badge was never proof of safety, it was the perfect disguise. Teenage girls, ordinary drivers, and sleeping couples were taught to trust the man with the gun and the uniform, and that trust became the exact thing that got them killed. Every one of these men wore the badge for years before anyone thought to ask what was underneath it. Jared Schaefer. He still had the badge when the killing happened. He did not still have it when the state of Florida finally locked him in a cell for murder. In between those two facts sits the entire mechanism of how he got away with it for as long as he did. That is not an irony. That is the entire mechanism. Gerard John Schaefer Jr. worked as a deputy in Martin County, Florida, after a stint with the Wilton Manors Police Department. He had a badge, a patrol car, and every ounce of instant credibility that comes with both. That kind of credibility does not need to be earned twice. It just needs to be flashed once at the right moment to the right person. That is the whole trick. Not force, not a struggle in a parking lot, just a shield and a calm voice, and a teenager's brain doing exactly what it was trained to do the second it saw that shield. Two teenagers, Susan Place and Georgia Jessup, trusted exactly that combination in 1972. A cop does not need to drag you into a car, a cop just needs to ask. That is the surface story people tell about Schaefer, a bad apple who got caught. Simple, tidy, over in one sentence. You know, the problem is what got caught actually took, because the timeline underneath that sentence is a lot uglier than the sentence itself. Got caught makes it sound fast, like the system snapped into action the moment something went wrong. It was not fast. It was a system that took its time noticing what was standing in front of it the whole time, wearing its own uniform. Martin County fired him in mid-1972, less than a month into the job, after an abduction attempt landed on his own department's desk. No badge, no patrol car, no more instant credibility. Just a man who already knew exactly how much that uniform had been worth to him, and exactly how quickly it could be taken away once somebody actually looked. 1 month. That is all it took for the department to catch what should have disqualified him from the start. 1 month of a badge in the wrong hands is still 1 month too many. And the girls who crossed paths with him in that window did not get a recall notice. Nobody sent them a memo saying the badge had gone bad. In October 1973, over a year after he was already off the force, he was convicted for the murder and mutilation of both girls and handed 2 concurrent life sentences. 2 victims, 2 convictions, case closed, at least on paper. Except investigators and true crime researchers have spent decades pointing at a body count that dwarfs that number, with estimates running as high as 26, and other accounts pushing it to around 30. 2 on paper, 30 in the whispers. That is not a small gap to explain away, and nobody involved has ever managed to explain it away cleanly. Nothing in official record proves every one of those killings. Follow the pattern anyway. A man with recent unsupervised access to young women through a badge he no longer carried. A documented taste for boasting about violence to fellow inmates, the kind of boasting that does not sound like fiction once you line it up against the rest of the file. A timeline of disappearances across the late 1960s and early 1970s that lines up with his movements a little too well to call coincidence. That gap between 2 proven murders and 30 suspected ones is not a rounding error. It is a man who understood that a badge does not just open car doors, it closes investigations, and that the closing does not stop the moment the badge gets handed back. He earned 3 separate nicknames over the years: Killer Cop, Hangman, Butcher of Blind Creek. Most murderers get one name if they are lucky. Schaefer collected a trilogy which tells you exactly how much reputation he built before anyone with handcuffs caught up to him. 3 names for 1 man, and every single one of them earned the hard way. You do not get a nickname collection like that from A Quiet Life, and you definitely do not get one from a single bad afternoon. Susan Place and Georgia Jessup did not vanish because they were careless. They vanished because they did what every parent tells every kid to do if something feels wrong: find the officer. The one person a scared teenager is trained to run toward turned out to be the one person they should have run from. That is not a flaw in their judgment. That is a flaw in the entire premise that the badge means safety. And that flaw did not get patched. It got buried under 2 life sentences and called closure. Closure for the paperwork, not closure for the other 2 or 3 dozen families still waiting on an answer nobody official is giving them, and probably never will. Schaefer's uniform was not incidental to the crime. It was the delivery system, and its expiration date did not matter once the trust was already installed. Departments in the early 1970s did not run the kind of psychological screening or cross-jurisdictional tracking that might have flagged a man this comfortable with violence before he ever got fired. He could move from one police department to another, sheriff's office to sheriff's office, and the authority followed him every step, no questions asked twice, right up until Martin County finally did ask. 0 red flags on paper, every red flag in hindsight. That is the most useless kind of clarity there is, the kind that only shows up once the bodies are already counted. 2 convictions, 2 life sentences, served concurrently, which is its own quiet joke since concurrent sentences barely register as punishment when the true number of victims is even a fraction of the estimates. The legal system settled for the 2 murders it could actually prove and left the other 2 or 3 dozen as an asterisk. Add that to the list of things a badge apparently buys you, even a badge already sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, the benefit of the doubt right up until somebody finds the bodies. Great, add that to the pile. Schaefer at least got caught after the badge was already cold. But imagine one who didn't stop at hiding behind the uniform, who used the access it gave him to hunt while everyone still called him officer. Manuel Pardo. A cop with a badge does not need to lure you into a car, he just needs to turn on his lights. That is the upgrade nobody wants to think about. Schaefer needed charm, a uniform, and a quiet stretch of road to get a girl to trust him for 30 seconds. Manuel Pardo needed even less effort than that, because for years, he had carried the one credential that turned suspicion off in the average person's brain, no matter who is wearing it. Working out of Sweetwater, Florida, Pardo spent his career as the law, not adjacent to it, not pretending at it, actually it. By the time his killing spree began in the mid-1980s, that credential had already done its damage, and it did not need to be renewed to keep working on people. It just needed to have existed once. That is the entire mechanism, and it is a lot simpler and a lot darker than most people want to admit. The surface story sounds almost procedural. Officer goes bad, officer commits crimes, officer gets caught. South Florida true crime coverage files him exactly that way. A former police officer turned killer, one more entry on a regional list, filed and forgotten between 2 other cases nobody remembers either. That framing is closer to correct than you would expect, and that is exactly what makes the case land differently once you actually sit with it. Pardo was not moonlighting as a criminal on his days off, and he was not still pinning on a badge every morning either. By the time the murder started, the department had already fired him. What he carried into those killings was not active authority. It was everything active authority leaves behind once it is gone, the residue that keeps working long after the paperwork says it should not. Nobody revokes muscle memory. That is the distinction that should stop you cold. A civilian who kills has to build trust from nothing, has to construct it piece by piece with every single victim, starting from zero every time with no shortcuts available. A man who spent years as a cop already knows exactly how that trust gets built, because he spent a career building it professionally on the clock with a paycheck attached and a supervisor signing off on it. The badge does not just open doors while you are wearing it, it teaches you which doors open, which questions never get asked, and which posture makes a stranger relax instead of run. Somebody sees a man who carries himself like police, and the instinct is not fear. It is relief. People exhale around that posture, the same way you exhale when you see a seatbelt sign turn off. Automatically, without thinking about it at all. That instinct is exactly what got exploited, badge or no badge, receipt or no receipt. Think about what that training actually means in practice, because it is not abstract. A former officer knows how patrol works, how questions get asked, how suspicion moves through a neighborhood, block by block, house by house, name by name. He knows what makes a person look official even without a uniform on his back. Every tool designed to make the public feel protected had already been handed to Pardo once, and he did not need it reissued to remember how to use it. He did not kick down the door with a badge in his hand. He walked through doors that his years on the job had already taught him how to open quietly, the way someone walks through a house they used to live in, and still knows exactly where the creaky floorboard is, even with the locks changed. This is the part of the pattern the video keeps circling back to. It is not that a killer happened to wear a uniform for a while, it is that a career built entirely on public trust does not evaporate the moment the badge gets taken away. Termination does not come with an eraser. Pardo had spent years learning exactly how far that trust extends and exactly how little people question it once they see it. He got proximity that an ordinary stranger could never earn in 30 seconds flat, and he got it because the instincts of a cop do not switch off on the day of a termination letter. That is the exact trust Schaefer weaponized with words, charm, and patience, built slowly, sentence by sentence, over a stranger's hesitation. Pardo had it baked into how he carried himself, no charm required, no small talk necessary, no seduction at all. And that is what makes his case worse, not better, than a criminal who happened to end up on a police force for a while. A person who lies their way into policing is still, underneath it, a liar wearing a costume. Take the uniform off, and the person underneath was never the real thing to begin with, just a costume with the zipper undone. Pardo had worn the real thing, sworn in, trained, given actual legal authority for years, and even after that authority was stripped from him, the fluency remained fully intact, sitting there waiting to be used whenever he needed it. The department did not fail to notice a wolf in sheep's clothing while it was happening under their own badge number. The wolf had already been let go and still walked around like the uniform was never taken off him at all. He was caught, prosecuted, convicted. On paper, the system worked exactly the way it is supposed to, eventually. But notice what eventually is doing in that sentence, because the timeline matters here. and it is not flattering. His firing itself came only after he had already been caught lying on the job, falsifying the very reports the badge was supposed to make trustworthy in the first place. The department did not stop a killer. It stopped a man from wearing the uniform, and the habits that uniform built walked out the door with him anyway, fully formed, ready to be used on people who had no reason to suspect a thing. Because why would they, when everything he had learned was designed to make sure they never would? Even now, decades later, true crime coverage cannot agree on how to file him. Some call him a serial killer who used to be a cop. Others call him a corrupt officer who happened to kill, a technicality dressed up as a category, as if the order of events changes what he actually did. That argument itself is telling, and it is not a minor detail. It means the profession blurred the crime, made it debatable, made him easier to slot into a smaller, quieter mention than a case with his body count should ever get. Somebody's daughter, somebody's neighbor, treated the presence of law enforcement bearing as proof of safety, because that is exactly what they were trained their whole lives to do. That assumption is exactly why his name gets softened into a footnote instead of a warning. Both of these men were caught relatively fast. But what happens when one is so careful, so trained, that the case goes cold for decades, and the badge does not just hide him for years, it hides him for a lifetime? Joseph DeAngelo. He spent years training other cops how to think like a predator, and it turns out he already knew exactly how because he was one. That's the part that separates this case from the rest. This wasn't a man who slipped past the system by accident, hiding in the cracks and hoping nobody looked too hard, praying his luck held one more year. He helped build the instincts the system relied on in the first place. Joseph DeAngelo worked as a police officer in Auburn, California. At the exact same time, he was breaking into homes across the state, moving in and out of neighborhoods like he had a map nobody else could see. And every procedure he knew, every gap in evidence collection, every blind spot in how departments talked to each other, or failed to, he understood better than almost anyone wearing the badge next to him. His crimes started in the mid-1970s, and they didn't stay contained in one town where a sharp detective might have connected the dots. They spread across county lines, jurisdiction after jurisdiction, which is the entire reason he became known as the Golden State Killer, instead of something smaller, something local, something containable. Different police departments were chasing pieces of the same man for years without ever realizing it was the same man. Paperwork in one county, a separate case file in another, nobody comparing notes fast enough, nobody connecting a burglary in one jurisdiction to an assault 3 towns over, because on paper, those were just 2 unrelated files sitting in 2 unrelated drawers. And the guy exploiting that confusion had spent time on the inside of that exact machinery, watching how the gears turned, learning precisely which gears never turned at all. Think about what that actually means. This isn't a criminal getting lucky with bad forensics or catching one good break at the right moment. This is someone diagnosing the disease and then designing an entire pattern of behavior around it, treating the jurisdictional gaps not as luck, but as a blueprint, a working set of instructions for exactly how far he could push before anyone noticed. Picture the scene from the other side of it for a second. A homeowner locks every door, checks every window, does everything they are told keeps them safe, and it doesn't matter, not even a little, because the man circling the property already knows which safety measures are theater and which ones actually work. That is the horror underneath the headline. Ordinary people did exactly what they were supposed to do, followed every piece of advice a police department would hand out, and it changed nothing. Because the person hunting them had already been trained on the other side of that exact system. He wasn't guessing at their routines. He had helped write the manual on how routines get exposed, then used that manual against the very people it was supposed to protect. 2 men in this video used the badge to get close and get away with it. One flashed it to lure victims into a car, one used it to run an entire operation without ever looking suspicious to the people around him. DeAngelo took that same advantage and pushed it somewhere colder. He didn't need to lure anyone with a badge or hide behind a title while he worked. He just needed to disappear. And for decades, he did exactly that, walking around free while an entire state searched for a stranger who, on paper, could have been standing right next to them. Could have been the officer who took their statement after a neighbor's house got hit. That's the piece that makes this case the hardest one to sit with. Every internal safeguard policing supposedly has, the training, the oversight, the instinct of officers who are supposed to recognize their own, none of it touched him. Not for years, not for decades. The badge didn't just fail to stop him. It actively helped him disappear into the very profession built to find people like him, giving him cover that an ordinary suspect could never have manufactured on his own, no matter how careful he was. A common misconception treats him as just a burglar or just a serial rapist, filing him into a smaller, more survivable category than the truth actually demands. But the consensus among people who have studied this case closely goes further than that, recognizing him as a murderer as well, and the full scope of what he did across how many towns, over how many years, is still argued about today. Nothing in the public record settles that number completely, but the pattern points towards something far larger than most people realize when they hear the name for the first time. So what actually stopped him? Not a suspicious partner, not an internal investigation, not a fellow officer noticing the guy at the next desk fit a pattern nobody wanted to say out loud. None of the safeguards built into the profession ever so much as flagged him. He was caught decades later, after investigators used modern forensic methods to finally connect him to crimes that had gone cold since before some of the detectives working the case were even born. Genetic evidence did what badges, training, and institutional trust could never manage between them. It found him, quietly, patiently, with zero interest in who he used to be or what he used to wear, to work every morning. That is the detail worth sitting with. A man who understood every weakness in the system that was supposed to catch criminals like him got caught by the one thing that has no relationship to that system at all. DNA doesn't check credentials. It doesn't recognize seniority. It doesn't care if you got 20 years on the force and a commendation on the wall behind your desk. It just sits there, waiting, patient in a way no detective ever has to be, until the technology finally catches up enough to read it. No badge to flash at it, no jurisdiction to hide across. It doesn't file paperwork, and it doesn't lose track of a case, and it definitely doesn't get reassigned before it finishes the job. That's the answer, sitting underneath all three of these cases. A trooper's badge got a girl into a car, a detective's badge ran an entire trafficking operation without a single internal alarm going off, and an officer's badge let a man vanish inside the very institution built to hunt him down. Different decades, different states, same exact failure because the badge was never actually a barrier standing between predator and victim. It was a disguise, and a good one, handed out by the same system that trained these men to wear it convincingly, then trusted them to police themselves with it on. Nobody on the inside has stopped any of them. Not one partner, not one review board, not one instinct of the profession catching its own before more people died. What stopped them came from outside the system entirely, evidence with no loyalty to a uniform, no relationship to rank, and no interest whatsoever in protecting the institution that failed to catch its own for years. D'Angelo is the proof that closes the whole argument. He is the case where the badge worked exactly as well as it always had, right up until science arrived and made the badge completely irrelevant. Decades of training, oversight, and internal trust bought him nothing but time, and even that ran out the moment a lab did what an entire profession couldn't. It didn't take a better cop to end this. It took something no cop could ever control. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.